So you made a lower grade on your newsletter. What happened? Well, these are issues that I saw across the board throughout my 3 classes, and I covered these issues in this handout so that you would have them, kind of know where you stand. So paragraphing, to indent or not indent. Okay. Rule of thumb in the business world is do not indent paragraphs, but instead have spaces, well, one line space in between each paragraph to show that your paragraphs stand out. You indent in academic papers. The 500-word limit, plus or minus 10 words. Yes, I counted them. Before you do your revisions on these, I suggest that you also do a word count and check to make sure that you hit 500 words. You can hit 490 and you can hit 510, but you cannot be on either side of those numbers. So get as close to 500 words as possible. Biggest problem I have is probably objective writing and the use of personal pronouns. The next biggest was drop quotes. You just threw a quote in there. Some of you didn't use in-text citations, some of you did. How to use an in-text citation, introduction and the punctuation, making sure it's correct, and placement of citations. So what is objective writing? Okay, objective writing uses third-person pronouns. It, he, she, they. In contrast to subjective writing, which you use first-person pronouns, I or we, or second-person pronoun, you. Most of the time you will see that I have scratched through all the I's, the we's, the us, the me, the my, and the you. Please keep you out of any of your documentation that you use when you're writing for business. Okay. So how to write objectively, I give you some hints here on how to use passive tone, when to use passive tone. Most of the time, the only people that will ever use passive tone are scientists. Everyone else will use active voice. All right, and here are some examples on how to use passive tone versus active voice and where it works. Focus on the evidence. If you gave me evidence, make sure that you introduced it in this format. Use evidence from sources. Avoid and drop quotes, which means you have to introduce it. Use the author's name, the date, and what they show. Remember, articles do not talk, so you can't say, this article said, this article stated, this article discuss. People talk. So talk about Newbold, who wrote the article, and the title demonstrates, and then quote. Make sure you always use a person that discusses what was in the article they wrote. Never write according to the article because, again, articles don't talk. People do. Impersonal contractions. Okay, I put this on there so that you would know that it and there are vague. Try to stay away from those 2 words. Also, I want you to stay away from I believe that, because anytime you use I believe, it shows me right away that you're not really confident or sure of what information you're giving me. If I were to say to you, I believe you're making a C, you probably would question, okay, am I really making a C or am I making something else? So keep that in mind when you say I believe or I think. State what it is. Personify the writing. Direct quotation marks. I put this in here because a lot of students were making issues with quotation marks, how to use them. I saw a quotation mark that started at the beginning but didn't end, or it wouldn't start at the beginning and you had a quotation mark at the end of it. You have to have, when you open one, you have to close it. Capitalize the first letter of the direct quote. Here's an example. If it's a complete sentence, you capitalize this letter here. Again, another complete sentence, capitalize the letter. If it is a fragment, do not capitalize. Place colons and semicolons outside the closed quotation marks, which means commas go inside the quotation marks, and so do periods. Place a question mark or exclamation point within close in quotation marks if the punctuation applies to the quote itself. If it applies to the sentence, it goes outside. So here are two examples. The question is inside the quotes. This question is outside the quotes. It starts with does. Quotes inside a quote. If the person that you are quoting quotes from somebody else, you have to drop that down to single quotes inside double. That's how I always remember it. This is what you're doing. This is where you are pulling the quote from the person you're quoting, and they pulled a quote from someone else. So again, here's another example on how to do that correctly. And then quotation marks beyond quoting. If you want to emphasize something, I suggest instead of using quotation marks and maybe not being exactly sure how it works, just put that in italics. And then periods and sentences. You learned this in 3rd grade. Again, I saw a lot of these errors when you were writing up your stuff. You would put the period inside this quotation mark and then put your page number or your in-text citation. That's incorrect. Last time I checked, the period ends, so that ends there. And then the 24 in parentheses actually goes with the sentence afterwards. So if you want to avoid that, there's no period after nothing. Instead, it goes behind that parentheses. If you do not have an in-text citation because you are using APA, then again, you have it here because it's not an end in-text citation. You're putting the person's last name and the date. So some that I used for class examples show some of the issues that I saw. This title here, while it's a different font color and it's green, it's fine, but titles do not have periods at the end. Here's your to indent or not indent. Again, do not indent. Get rid of those indentations, and see, here's the one line space. You cannot have both. You only have one. So even in academic papers, this is incorrect because, again, there's a line space here, and you would not normally do that if you indented. Another problem that I have with this is this was not quoted, nor did I know where it came from. So make sure when you pull data, you tell me exactly where it comes from. On this one, here's your comma outside those quotation marks. Again, commas go always inside quotation marks. And these are your citations at the end. While the citations are fine, they're too small for somebody to read. If the boss wanted to use that, they wouldn't be able to read it to see what you said. Another issue that I had with this is that, unfortunately, this column width on the first column is not the same as the column width on the second column. That will mess with somebody's eyes. You have to make it consistent. So if one side has to be exactly as wide as the other side, if you have images, make sure that these images don't infringe upon these widths. So if you put an image somewhere in here, the image has to be just as wide as this column. All right, the next one, the only one that I'm going to say about this one is that it's all entirely one paragraph. Now, most of the time, bosses are busy, I am busy, other students are busy. Again, if you want somebody to read this, more than likely, they're not going to read it. The reason they're not going to read it is because it's all one paragraph. Break it up, make it into, again, different paragraphs. Keep your ideas together. Again, here's the use of second person pronoun. Need to take that away and change it up. And then this one here, okay, while this is fine, again, these are 3 columns that aren't equally spaced on the width. There's too much space in between each line, so make sure that we work with keeping it single spaced. And, you know, again, what did your other team members do, and what does their work look like? Are the fonts the same? Here is absolutely too much white space. And then you have a title, a header, a heading, and then you have subtitles. And your subtitles are different sizes. So this here So why do we see much team failure? Again, that's a subtitle. It needs to be larger. It needs to be in bold. This is a subtitle. It needs to be the same size as the subtitle. So make sure you keep your subtitles exactly the same. I wouldn't say do a complete justification if you're going to end up with spaces like this. And this is extra white space. There was an image that was down below it. Bring that image up. And then if these are your citations, you can put a box around them, but make sure that they're a font size 1 or 2 smaller. They need to be readable though. These are readable, but they're too close to the text itself. So I would not necessarily say put the citations on the right hand or on the left side. I would be more likely to put them on the right side at the very end of your article, not kind of in the middle of your article, because as people read, they want to go down and then continue reading here. These are in the way. So you need all your text here in these columns, and then your final citations need to be over here at the very end. And then this example, while I am all for bullets, because again, on the one paragraph example I showed you, bullets would have come in handy. You can overuse bullets. This is an example of a newsletter that bullets are overused. There's too much there and there's too much information. So cut down on some of the information and make sure that people can read this and read it fast. Most newsletters, the templates that you're pulling up, again, need to look professional and not like they're going towards school. But there are 2 or 3 columns. Very rare do you find a newsletter that doesn't have columns in it. So keep that in mind. If you made a newsletter that just is a straight, you're putting everything on one page and you have very few images, go back and look at some templates and pull up templates, because you're missing your introduction, usually heading on a newsletter that has your main title, and it should have a date on it. You should have some column where you can put your names and your titles down on the side and then start working on your newsletter and how it rolls out. So these are some of the reasons why your grades were a little lower. Remember that you can revise this newsletter. This will be the last assignment you get to revise, because you only revise on group projects. So make sure that when you do the revision, everybody in the team must revise their own work. And again, each person should have the newest, greatest edition, and you'll post that into your Google Sites portfolio at the end. If you have any questions, make sure you contact me and I can go over a newsletter and some examples and maybe look at your section by itself so that we can go through and try to figure out how to fix everything. Have a great evening, and I will talk to you the next time.